Hello everyone, very nice to meet you again. We are going to study chapter 4, communicating across cultures. Today's chapter's learning goals are here. There are 5 and some more goals for this chapter. First one is to recognize the culture variables in communication process and what factors can cause noise in that process. Second, develop an awareness of difference in nonverbal behaviors, context, and attitude and how they affect cross-cultural communications. Thirdly, to understand the complexities of Western Arab communications. Fourth, to be aware of the impact of IT on cross-border communications. Fifth, to learn how to successfully manage cross-cultural communications. Here, introduce opening profile about Google's internet communications clash with European culture. The opening profile demonstrates that the communication is a critical factor in the cross-cultural management issues, particularly those of interpersonal nature involving motivation, leadership, group interactions, and negotiations. Google expansion in Europe and is now getting caught in a culture web of privacy laws. Google's plan to introduce Street View is challenged by the privacy laws in Switzerland and Germany. The EU has fired a warning shot across the bows of search engine companies. The EU's Article 29 Data Protection Working Group is contesting Google's practices of holding personal information about its customers and would institute policy changes related to the Google service. Okay, what is the communication process? The communication process is the process of sharing meaning by transmitting messages through media such as words, behavior, or material artifacts. As shown in this figure, there are several stages in this process in which meaning can be distorted. Anything that undermines the communication of an intended message is referred to as noise. Noise exists because people filter or selectively understand messages consistent with their own expectations and perceptions of reality and their values and the norms of behavior. As such, the more dissimilar the cultures of those involved, the more likely it is misinterpretation will occur. Next. When a member of one culture sends a message to a member of another culture, intercultural communication occurs. The message contains the meaning intended by the encoder, but the decoder's culture ends up becoming part of the meaning as he or she interprets the message. Attribution is the process in which people look for an explanation of another person's behavior. When someone does not understand another, he or she usually blames the confusion on the other stupidity, deceit, or craziness. This slide illustrates miscommunication and cultural noise by highlighting a portion of an example. Here, American, how long will it take to finish this report? The American says. He asked the other person to participate. I'm sorry, it's the Greek person. The Greek person, he thought he is the boss. Why doesn't he tell me? It's like the noise, you know. Okay, here. Effective communication depends on the informal understanding among the parties involved that are based on the trust developed between them. When trust exists, there is implicit understanding within communication. Cultural differences may be overlooked and problems can be dealt with more easily. The meaning of trust and how it is developed and communicated vary across societies. Similarly, some cultures have a greater propensity to be trusting than others. Okay. Here, the culture communication link. We say the GLOBE project. The GLOBE research discussed also illustrate culturally appropriate communication styles and expectations. These examples show how to draw implications for appropriate communication styles from research on cultural differences. Next. There are cultural barriers in communication. These cultural barriers can affect communication via a person's perceptions. The effects of these barriers are interdependent and inseparable. Attitudes underlie our behavior, communication, and interpretation. Ethnocentric attitudes are a particular source of noise. Stereotyping occurs when a person assumes that every member of a society or subculture has the same characteristic. Astute managers deal with people as individuals. The kinds of social organizations we belong to can influence our perceptions. Examples of social organization include one's nation, tribe, religious sect, or profession. The thought patterns of reasoning varies widely across cultures. So managers cannot assume others use the same reasoning processes. An example of Canadian who misunderstood the meaning of double lines on the road in Thailand assumed the lines meant no passing, just as they do in Canada. But Thailand policeman replied, the double line just indicate the center of the road. It's the different, meaning, totally different meaning. Okay, next, culture, another continuous cultural barriers in communication. Cultures differ in terms of their perceptions regarding who should make decisions and who has a responsibility for what. When two people do not share a common language, communication problems arise. Even in countries that share the same language, problems can arise from the subtleties and nuances inherent in language. Because of increasing diversity, managers often have to deal with workforces that speak a variety of languages, even within a single country. Translation can be problematic as well. When Pepsi Cola's slogan "Come Alive with Pepsi" was introduced in Germany, the company learned that the literal translation was "come out of the grave with Pepsi." It's a totally different meaning. Okay, here, nonverbal communication is here behavior that communicates without words. Though it often may accompanied by words, nonverbal communication has been shown to account for between 65% and 93% of interpreted communication. Here the media for nonverbal communication. Kinesthetic behavior is communication through body movement. For example, posture, like this, gestures, facial expression, and eye contact. The meaning of such behavior varies across countries. For example, in China, sticking out the tongue indicates surprise, whereas widening your eyes indicates anger. Oculesics are a form of kinesthetics that includes eye contact and the use of eyes to convey messages. Proxemics concern the influence of proximity and space on communication, both personal space and office space or layout. In high contact culture, the people prefer to stand close and to experience a close sensory environment. Low contact cultures, the people have a distant style of body language. Para language refers to how something is said rather than the content of what is said. For example, rate of speech, tone and inflection of voice, other noises, laughing, yawning, and silence. For example, the Chinese tend to spend about 30 seconds thinking before they speak. Americans are only comfortable with 10 to 15 seconds of silence. The object language or material culture refers to how we communicate through material artifacts. For example, architecture, office design and furniture, clothing, cars, cosmetics, and time. In monochronic cultures, in Switzerland, Germany, United States, time is experienced in a linear way. It says sometimes time can be spent, saved, made up, or wasted. Time orders life, and people tend to concentrate on one thing at a time. In polychronic culture, in Latin Americans and Arabs, people tolerate many things happening simultaneously and may focus on several things at once. In these cultures, people may be highly distractible, focus on several things at once, and change plans often. Here are the cultural context and its effects on communication. The contents in which the communication takes place affects the meaning and interpretation of the interaction. High context culture do not express feelings and thoughts explicitly, clearly. Larger, one has to read between the lines and interpret meaning from one's general understanding. Low context culture usually compartmentalize personal and business relationship. As such, communication must be more explicit. To illustrate, Germans will expect considerable detailed information before making a business decision. Arabs will base decisions more on knowledge of the people involved. Here are the low, the high explicitness of communication. Yeah, here. So there are high context or low context as a relationship with the people in different countries. Next. Americans often have difficulty reading some Asian facial expressions, especially those referred to as the poker face, Oriental, and idiotic Asian smile. To Americans, who tend to put more emphasis on taking when communicating, these facial expressions seem to be conceal the person's real feelings. Asians, however, tend to put more emphasis on listening when communication because the heavier burden is placed on the listener. The speaker feels less compunction to send clearly discernible message cues. The cues that are sent can be very subtle and easy for Americans to miss. To Americans, silence represents discontinuity of communication and creates discomfort. To Asians, silence is an integral part of the communication process and is used to reflect on messages previously exchanged and for crafting thoughts before speaking them. And just as Americans are uncomfortable with the Oriental poker face and silence, Asians may find Americans overly blunt, confident, and too talkative. Arab culture is one of the emotional extremes, and this characteristic is illustrated in the language, which contains means for overexpression, many adjectives and words that allow for exaggeration. Arabs tend to do business with other people, not with the organization. As such, establishing relationship and protecting the honor of others is very important. For instance, one should not decline offers of hospitality, should expect conversation to be meander, and should be careful not to criticize in front of others. As a high contact communicators, Arabs tend to stand closer when talking and to touch more frequently. The distance often preferred by Americans can make them seem suspicious. But the Arab thinks the people too cold. Arabs are polychronic and believe that something will happen only if Allah wills it to happen. As such, it is inappropriate to place deadlines on activities, and many interruptions during conversations should be anticipated. There are communication channels, information system, speed of information, follow and use, informal sources of information. Here are examples: Japanese Nikkensei versus American adversarial. In addition to variables related to the sender and receiver, variables related to the communication channel are also important for understanding the message. In high context cultures, information tends to spread very rapidly. In low context cultures, information is focused and controlled. It does not flow as freely. The Japanese Nikkensei style of communication emphasizes saving and giving face, reciprocity, and an underlining distrust of words and analytic logic. The Japanese believe words mask true intentions. Public agreement is avoided at all costs. Americans, on the other hand, tend to be more explicit, direct, and verbose, talkative, task-oriented, and confrontational. Information technology. There was how to going global and acting local. Global reach does not necessarily mean global business. The web is interpersonal, but may require great cultural sensitivity. There is a predicted annual growth rate of 70% for non-English language sites and usage. The impersonal nature of the web must be adapted to local cultures to establish relationships and win customer loyalty. There are several things a manager can do to encourage effective cross-cultural communication. Here to develop cultural sensitivity is to anticipate the meaning the receiver will get. and careful encoding. For example, using word pictures and gestures to avoid slang, idioms, regional sayings. And selective transmission to build relationship face-to-face if possible. And careful decoding of feedback to get feedback from multiple parties to improve listening and observation skills. And then follow-up actions. To keep lines of communication open, managers must follow through with what has been discussed and agreed upon. Contract follow-through can be particularly difficult given that cultures have different ideas about what constitutes a contract. Okay, here, how to facilitate intercultural communication. There is a connection between a person's personality trait and their ability to adapt to the host country's environment, including the ability to communicate within that environment. Two key personality traits are openness and resilience. Openness includes traits such as tolerance for ambiguity, extrovertedness, the open-mindedness. Resilience includes having an internal locus of control, persistence, tolerance for ambiguity, and resourcefulness. These factors combined with the person's cultural and racial identity and level of preparedness for change comprise that person's potential for adaptation. Thank you for joining this class. See you again. Bye.